Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Robert Gunther, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for United Fresh. We want to thank you for being on our second of our three-part playbook series that's getting us ready for this year's Washington Conference, which will be held in September. We're excited to have the group we have today with all of us today, and look forward to a really engaging and good discussion about how we actually are going to sell fresh to Congress. So today, we're not going to focus much on the message, particular message, what to say about particular issues, but really what are the best approaches to getting members of Congress attention, their office's attention, and how is that the best way to really stand out in terms of our visits coming in September. So what I'm going to do is share my screen right now, and we'll get started. All right, everybody see that? Angela, shake your head if you can see that. Great. So for today's panel, I'm going to go through a few slides and then bring the panel on. But I wanted to first introduce our panel today. I'm happy to be excited to be joined by an interesting group of folks who have a lot of diversity of interest in fresh produce, but also in congressional interaction. First and foremost, I want to introduce Jennifer Cash. She is currently the Legislative Director of Office of Congresswoman Kim Shire. She currently is, Congressman Shire represents the 8th Congressional District. Jennifer has worked on and off the Hill for the past 10 years, serving 3 different Washington members from both Republican and Democratic parties. She's originally from the 8th Congressional District. Jen was born and raised in a small family farm in the Wenatchee Valley. She currently resides in Washington, D.C. Area with her husband, 2 young girls, a boy that is due next month. Congratulations. 2 dogs, 4 chickens, and 2 guinea pigs. So welcome, Jen, to the panel. Next, I want to introduce Danelle Mackey-Almy. She's the President and CEO of DMA Solutions Incorporated. Danelle has been a very avid supporter of the Washington Conference, has participated many times in our congressional visits and the conference. So she's here to kind of talk through some of the things and messaging that she has experienced over that time. We're also joined by Melissa Ackerman, President of Produce Alliance. Again, Melissa's been doing a lot of work with members of Congress. This will actually be her first in-person Washington Conference experience this September. But she has, as I mentioned, and she'll talk about this later, some of the work she's already been doing on some issues that's important to her with members. And last but not least, we're happy to be joined by Shay Myers, the General Manager of Owyhee Produce. Shay, as a lot of you may know, has had a very active role in social media, getting words out on a lot of different issues related to the fresh produce industry. In fact, just recently, he testified about 2 weeks ago in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee on the importance of agriculture immigration reform. So again, Shay's going to talk to us about some of the efforts he's had over the last several years in getting the message out to elected leaders about our issues. Before we bring them on, I want to walk through a little bit of the background about this year's Washington Conference and some other things that we're going to be talking about today. So let me start real quick about the conference. As I mentioned, and as you know, we are back in person September 20th through 22nd here in Washington, D.C. We're excited. This will be the last standalone conference for United Fresh as we merge into our new organization starting January 2022. So we want to make sure this is a big and exciting one as the last actual United Fresh Washington Conference. In terms of what's happening here in DC, I don't know, Jen can talk about this some more as well as a resident of DC now. We are slowly opening back up. I will say that some congressional offices are open and will be open for the visits. Others, what some of the things we're talking about right now is others may come to us for some face-to-face meetings. But the big issue or most important issue there is we will maximize our personal connections to make sure that they are available and available to talk to you in person. So to walk through quickly the schedule for those who have not looked up online or have not registered yet, the schedule is pretty straightforward, very similar to what we've had in the past. On Monday, we will be doing some of the key highlights there is we will have in the morning an optional Mount Vernon tour for those to attend. That's first come, first serve. And I know there's a limited amount of availability for that tour. We also will be hosting our traditional morning council and segment board meetings during the morning. And then that is followed by our popular advocacy boot camp, which will go on that afternoon that I know a lot of folks have really enjoyed over the years, where we dig deep into kind of effective ways to communicate, what are going to be some of our messages on Capitol Hill, and how things, kind of are working at this point in time, and the latest updates on how things are going to be working. We also have a chairman's thank you reception, and then obviously a welcome reception for all attendees will be that evening. Then on Tuesday, you can see we're going to be doing our general sessions, several exchange sessions, a business solution showcase. We will be then in the afternoon, we'll do breakfast and morning general sessions and the exchange sessions in between. Then in the afternoon, we'll be doing what we call our congressional connections. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes of what that's going to most likely look like. And then that evening, we are going to be hosting our fresh packed dinner overlooking the U.S. Capitol on the rooftop of Charlie Palmer's, which I know some of you probably have attended. And it's probably one of the best views, if not the best view in DC related to having views of the Capitol. It'll be exciting evening, a fun evening to get together and regroup on talk about the things you worked on or you learned during the day. And then Wednesday, again, we'll come back together for a general session breakfast, and then we'll finish up with some more congressional connections. I wanted to point out too, that for those who attend, if you remember, if you guys participated in the virtual event last year, we are going to continue to hold congressional meetings over the next 5 to 7 days. We're not sure exactly how many days, doing the virtual style meetings. So those who register for the conference and they didn't have a chance to meet some members in person, there will be opportunities hopefully to meet during a virtual environment like we did last year. So that we're excited to continue that. And I know that was very popular last year, and it's been very popular this year, actually, early this year when we were doing our Meet the New Members, New Faces of Congress series with freshman members from January through June. So in terms of Capitol Hill access, and again, maybe Jen can talk a little bit more about this as much as she can speculate or tell us. Right now, as of this week, and again, this is kind of changing, it's evolving. Things have changed from 2 weeks ago than they were this week or even last week. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a mix of Capitol Hill offices that are doing in-person meetings. They are smaller meetings, usually about 5 official business visitors. The House and Senate are kind of running under separate kind of rules right now. There is one entrance for check-in at each building. And then the good news is that the fence, the Capitol fence was removed on July 9th. So that has really created additional access to the Capitol grounds, which, prior to that were very limited because of what happened on January 6th. So as I mentioned, kind of we're looking at a number of different options. And if I was a betting man as of today, it probably most likely will be a combination of these ideas. So, there'll be some meetings we can go to the Capitol Hill and go to their offices and have these meetings. I think those will be probably smaller groups than we're used to in terms of our teams. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be about, right now it's 5 per group to come up to the Hill and meet with offices. We also are looking at opening up some of the rooms that we traditionally use for exchange sessions to host meetings at the hotel, so members of Congress could come there and meet with a group of attendees. And then also we're looking at other areas around the Capitol, and even on the Capitol, to have larger group meetings that members, again, or senators can come in and out of the room and meet with their constituents, but also talk with other groups. And again, as I said, the bottom line is we will be meeting with Congress in person, to address those important issues that are important to our industry. So I brought this up, and I've used a similar version of this slide before because I think it applies no matter if we're meeting in person, no matter what we've done over the last 18 months or so in virtual. But really, these are the kind of key things that we consider the most effective ways to connect with congressional offices. And again, there's really, it makes sense, but it's good to remind folks about this, that, when we have a meeting, we need to be focused, factual, and informative. There needs to be a relevance. Why is this so important? Why should the member of Congress care about what the issues that we're talking about, and what's the point? What's the key point of why we're there and why we're having these meetings? It's important for you to engage, ask questions, and follow up. And I always mention this to everybody. It's super important to really not just talk about the policy issue as much as it is to personalize the connection, making members of Congress and their staffs, or giving them an opportunity to understand what this means to your business, your operation, you personally. Congressional staffs, again, there's some meetings that we will have a congressional staff versus the member, but they are critical allies in this process. They are the eyes and ears of members of Congress and senators, and they are the spear, so to speak, of making decisions within an office. So important for us to have those connections just as much as it is to have a meeting with the member of Congress or senator. Be sure to make a request, what we call to action. We want to make sure that we want to get their support. We want them to make changes of something that we don't like. Things like that are kind of what we talk about regarding making a request. And then try to get a clear answer. There are some times that offices, quite frankly, don't want to give you the full answer, or don't really kind of want to, are not prepared to give a good answer. Try to get a clear answer and understanding. And again, that's important to do, and making sure also that you follow up, as I mentioned in number 2, to make sure that they know you're very engaged in this type of conversation. So I'm going to finish, and then we're going to bring the group back on, the panel back on to start talking about some of these issues. But what I wanted to share with you was something that's come out over the last, I guess, late last year from what's called the Congressional Management Foundation. They are the group that does a lot of work looking at the Hill, looking how it engages, looking at how to help the Hill, kind of prepare offices. But they came out with a report late last year regarding the future of citizen engagement, and it's called Coronavirus, Congress, and Constituent Communications. And I wanted to share with you a few of the data points that they highlighted in that report. And as you can see, since COVID happened, really communication has transformed in terms of between elected officials and constituents, where 75% of congressional offices now are using more online technology. It makes a lot of sense. But also, over the last 18 months, there's been a significant decrease of visits and tours to facilities. And also, as you see here, 83% fewer in-person meeting with constituents. So I think when we go in there this in September, it's going to be important to reconnect in a personal level. I know talking with offices and members, they're looking forward to seeing people in person, but we got to understand, this has been this is a transition period we're going through. And in fact, this really is not unique. If you go back to September 11th and the anthrax scare back in 2001, what you saw there was actually a transformation of communication. Before that happened, it was mostly mailing, sending letters to and postcards to your members of Congress. And then overnight, almost when all of that happened, it changed to an email type communication. So if you go back and look that far, that was another transformational events, let's say, that really changed how constituents, how the U.S. communicates with their elected officials. So it isn't unique that this has happened. It's just, if you look at those two events, it's almost like bookends of how we all can communicate with Congress in different ways that are now going to be employed, kind of looking into the future. And interesting enough, as not surprising, I think also the report showed that offices will continue to virtually have virtual engagement with constituents. 77% of them say remote engagement with online with constituents will continue, and 60% increase devoted to online town hall meetings. So a lot of offices are going to continue this type of practice. A lot of them will say anecdotally that they've been able to reach more constituents than they have in the traditional ways. So you can see this continuing as we're doing today. And then last, which I thought was very encouraging, is a lot of offices said in this report that they had more substantive engagement with constituents. 59% said COVID-19 has caused their offices to have more substantive interactions. A lot of that had to do with constituents calling about PPP loans and other types of resources that could be available during this tragic event. So you had a lot of that type of engagement. But then I thought what was interesting too, that almost over 80% of the offices have increased actually their financial and personnel resources dedicated to constituent engagement because of what's happened over the last 18 months. So I wanted to just share those few little tidbits with you related to this report. I found them very interesting. There's other stuff that's available out there right now in terms of what the future looks like with engaging with Congress and other elected officials. So with that, I'm going to bring now on the panel. You can help me. There they are. Well, great. Well, thank you guys for joining me and joining us and keeping up through those slides. And we really appreciate you all being with us today. So I'm just going to start out with some general questions, and then I'll kind of go into some more individual questions for you. And I guess I want to start out, as I mentioned before, and maybe this is more for Danelle and Shay and Melissa. You've all engaged with Congress in different ways. Some of you, as I mentioned, Danelle, you've come to the Washington conference. Melissa, you have done virtual, but you've also done some stuff in your state and in your local area. Shay, you've done a lot of work in the social media space. What do you guys think really, in your experiences have made for a productive kind of meeting with an elected official with Congress? And maybe I'll start with Danelle, since she's done this from a Washington conference perspective. You're on mute.
The one thing you told us not to do. Hello, everyone. I would say that, I've had just the opportunity to attend the Washington conference longer than I'd like to admit. And it was, we've various topics that we've covered, various circumstances going on. I actually was there the first conference after 9/11. So, and been through various elections. And the one thing that I will say is the preparedness that United puts in front of us really should take the angst off. And so you're reading the briefs, they get you ready, and the information. And I think, just my experience of being the nervous one and my experience of having gone through it is you don't have to know every aspect of the information. United puts the people around the teams in that way. I would say that relative to the experiences, I've seen the most success relative to the exchange with the congressional, with the, the congressperson themselves and or with their aides, is when we can touch it on an emotional point. And Robert, I think that was number 3 on your slide, when we can make it real. And so when we can firsthand talk about the impact of what we're asking, I've seen that be the most results-oriented action that we can take. Facts, absolutely. If we can't just go in there with emotion, we're not going to be heard. But I would say that that's what's always stood out to me as being the number one way to connect. But I mean, that's basic. If you want to influence someone, you have to show up in a relatable way. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but hopefully can get the combo going.
Yeah, and I'm glad to be here. I'm just going to echo what Danelle just said, because it's all about your ability to communicate using your personal experiences and getting the emotional response based on your beliefs and your understanding of the situation. And what I found just by being there on the Hill recently is that the level of understanding, just like we find with the consumer, the level of understanding that the lawmakers and their staff have of how we operate is a lot more elementary than we realize. So when you're having that conversation, don't make assumptions about what their understanding of what we do is, because it's definitely not the same. We do this every day. We understand the industry. We understand the challenges. We understand the frustrations. And they may hear your frustrations, but they may not understand why they are frustrations and where the disconnect is. So I think, for lack of a better term, dumbing it down, being, basic about your approach and not getting, too far into the weeds. Certainly we need to speak to details, but make sure that they understand the foundation first before you get to the details.
I think that's a tremendous way to say it. We take for granted what we know in this industry. And so we must start meeting the person where they are. And to your point, have the facts there, of course, but don't start with that. Start with factual, but don't start with, the heavy lifting, I would say.
Yeah. And I think adding into that, when I've had recent meetings with congressmen and congresswomen, when you can paint, like for me, talking about the box program and taking people back to March and talking about lines at food banks and painting pictures of what we saw in the media and being able to connect the emotions to what we all have felt in the last year, that really helped. I also wanted to share that to prepare for Washington, to prepare for meetings, that what I've had, I have diagrams and things I've used, and we can get into that in a little bit later. But I think with Shay, what he does on social media, or what, if you can use pictures, I'll always take out my phone and show pictures of a field in anywhere I am, or an event that I go to connect, to bring back to the emotions side of what I'm doing, or to be able to describe the event of what I'm doing. So I think that, like Danielle and Shay has said, it really is speaking to exactly the facts of how you know it and the personal connection that you have to the topic that you're talking on.
Jen, what do you think in terms of what have you seen lately that's really been an effective type of communication with offices like yourself and others?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me be here. And I just want to say that my views are all my own. So I work for an elected member. So just want to get that out there. Honestly, what was said earlier, your number 3 point, make an emotional connection. I remember I was thinking about our questions, and I was thinking about this meeting I took last year with a bunch of producers from the Midwest on one of those, row crops that doesn't really have a substantial impact in our district or our state in Washington. And I was like dreading it a bit, and just because I didn't know much about it, and it, and it turned out to be a really great meeting, because, they shared personal stories. They were able to connect emotionally. They were able to, make that connection. We're all just human beings. And sometimes at the heyday of meetings, usually, different times a year around appropriations, we could take up to 8 meetings a day. So it could be back to back and exhausting. So any opportunity to make a personal connection, to talk about, and then it's always particularly noteworthy when, you're a constituent. I always, enjoy talking to folks from the district. That always resonates more too. And then what you were saying too, the follow-up is critical. Just, sometimes we take these meetings, we get the materials, we check the box, and then, we move on to the next thing, because just so much is being thrown our way. But having that personal connection, that personal follow-up is really helpful.
Can you share with us kind of what's happening right now in the Hill offices in terms of visits and things like that?
Yeah, it's very much up in the air, which is no surprise. I work on the House side. I think we were definitely looking at opening things up a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. It was going to get to that point. I think this Delta variant has kind of shaken things up. It's very much up in the air. I don't think they're still trying to figure out what kind of rules we'll be following when we go back in session in September or earlier. It is, I wish I had a better answer. It's really up in the air now, though. It was looking like we were going to open it up, but this variant we've gone back to, for a while in our office, we were maskless because we knew folks were vaccinated, and it was our personal office and no visitors. And now we've gone back to wearing masks indoors for everybody. So, and that was recent guidance by the House, by the Capitol CAO physician. So it's a very unknown time at this point.
Now, one of the things that I mentioned is trying to get a clear answer. And, with your background in messaging and in doing things like this, tell us kind of in your view, how do you feel people can get to kind of a good answer that, you feel like you've made progress, a real answer, so to speak, to better understand their position on certain issues?
I would say
Others can weigh in on this too. Sorry.
Sure.
If you have other ideas as well.
I would say that I definitely have a career in communications, but probably the best way I know how to deal with this is because I have a 21-year-old. So sometimes the answers to my questions aren't always straightforward. So what I have found success is when we're in that situation is to repeat to them what you've heard, and then to, allow them to have an opportunity to expand. So little tricks of the trade are tell me more, or am I hearing you correctly that this is what you're, communicating, or then asking definitely follow-up questions, which was already on your slide. But, just when you are unclear, because they may be feeling like they are being clear about it. So there's that camp, that circumstance, I should say. And then sometimes you just clearly understand that you're not getting an answer. I think that's where the follow-up comes in. I think potentially, if I don't know that this is advised by United, but I would be interested in what, Jen, you think, but is to just say, well, clearly there's not a definite answer here. Do you know when there could be some clarity around this and when we should follow up? I mean, that would be my instinct if I knew for certain that I wasn't being, that the answer wasn't being delivered. So I think Jen could probably guide us a little bit there, but that's what I would have done. I would do so.
So one thing that's difficult is every House office, I'm sure every Senate office, are little kingdoms upon themselves with their own set of operating rules and their own, practices and customs. And it's, at least the offices that I've worked in, it's been our custom, if it's a meeting with the boss, very rarely will she or he in my other office agree to a bill on the spot or agree to sign something on the spot, because these are just, depending on, usually I would say 90% of the time, unless it's an issue that he is very familiar with or she is very familiar with, because you want to do the back end staff work. What are some of the other implications here? Is there another side to this? Is there any groups that, I'm not saying there would be if you're pushing for a bill or to sign a letter, but could there be any ramifications that maybe we're not aware of, from this initial conversation? So it's always kind of our policy to not agree to something within the meeting. Now, usually, and I also don't like necessarily, if it's just me speaking for my boss, I could say, well, historically she's supported, similar provisions or similar bills, but I usually don't, say something like, yeah, she'll sign this. Absolutely. Let me get you an answer right away. Just because, but, certainly absolutely. We'll look into this. Let's follow up. I think that's a great way to end things. And then also too, there's some bosses who will just agree to things in a meeting or just on the spot. So it's hard because everyone has their own style and pace, and some members have been around just for ages. They know what they're about, and some just, you know, are newer to these issues and maybe not. So.
And Robert, can you clarify? I don't ever remember a time of us asking for a specific vote. I mean, I feel like we were asking for their consideration, or they're asking, you know, we weren't necessarily asking kind of the hard questions from what I remember, but maybe that's changed a little bit. So Jen, that brings a lot of light in that way, but I think sometimes we're just looking for an answer to a question that's more or less a consideration. I think that's how I would classify it. So Robert, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think you're right for the most part, because I think for most of our ask have been support this bill. It may not be that week up for a vote, or we're not aware, but you know, I think in some cases we said if this bill comes up for a vote, we'd like you to support it, or some. You know, there's some but most of it's been to support bills. And I think, you know, that's the right approach. I mean, I know Jen, and I will speak for Congresswoman Schreier's office, you know, because we've done a lot of work with them over the last several, you know, Congresses, which she's been in there, and it's been a great working relationship. So we kind of know where each other, you know, she knows where the produce industry for the most part is on a lot of issues, especially on the nutrition stuff that we spend a lot of time with them on. And we know where she is on a lot of these issues. So, you know, that's, you know, this is probably her office, and Jen's not a unique case, but, you know, it's one we have a good working relationship, and we both know kind of where people stand on different issues. So, yeah, I think that, you know, the direct ask, it kind of, you know, depends on where we are at the moment and what's on the docket. You know, what I say today is our message points may be different than we have in September on certain things, you know, and where things are, the infrastructure, immigration, you know, we're not sure where that's going to be. Of course, the House has already dealt with immigration. So long story short, you know, we may be focusing more on the immigration points to the Senate, because that's where this, you know, the bills are. And Shay, as I mentioned, just spoke on this issue a couple of weeks ago, but so that might be more pointed message in the Senate, you know, for this time than it would be in the House, because they've already, again, passed that Farm Worker Modernization Act, and all of our efforts now is to get the Senate to move forward. So Shay, let me ask you this, speaking of immigration, and then as I mentioned in my introduction, you have most recently been able to have the audience of the Senate Judiciary Committee on Immigration. Can you talk a little bit of how that went? As anybody's had a chance to look at the video, it certainly was an interesting first 20, 30 minutes or so with the Secretary of Ag in terms of the fireworks that were going on between the senators and him. You know, I think people would be interested in kind of how that went. Did you get a chance to talk to senators on their own? You know, kind of something, you know, to that nature, and kind of what was that situation like?
Yeah, well, it was a first for me. So my depth of perspective is not real deep, but certainly Vilsack is in favor of immigration reform, in favor of the Farm Worker Modernization Act. He was very well prepared for the, you know, the counter arguments that came from both Cruz and Lindsey Graham, especially. This is very, very much divided, unfortunately, right down party lines. The progress that we hope to make with the Republicans was a lot more shallow than what we aspired to do. The argument right now, so as we're there, if this hasn't been passed or it's stalled out, the argument is based upon what's happening on the border, current numbers crossing. The Republicans, while quite supportive of the DACA and the TDP and other parts of the bill, even in H-2A programs, they countered with their talking point or their argument that something has to be done at the border to reduce the numbers of the folks that are crossing. Whether or not they hash that out, I mean, that's a fairly complicated thing to get done. So, I came back not overly optimistic. I wouldn't say completely pessimistic either. But I think if I learned anything, again, it's to try and get some sort of commitment and conversation going about, what they will do, and to stress the urgency. I think that's the thing that for me as a grower shipper is how dire the situation is right now. And that's a pretty easy thing to speak to on an emotional level, on a business level, and on a personal level. So, I think they were listening, but I'm not sure that the party line vote's going to allow the progress that we need. Looking forward, I mean, are there other solutions? I don't know. I mean, they talk about how seldom immigration policy makes it as far as it has already. So now's really the time. If it's going to happen, it's going to be now, or it's going to be, something we're talking about in 5 or 10 years.
Melissa, I know you spent some time working with congressional offices, as you mentioned before, just really on an important issue that all of us worked on for a number of months, the produce box program. But I know you're working on some other things that kind of build on that success. You want to talk about that and kind of the impact that has had thus far in terms of your efforts to get these members of Congress, and what's some of the effective messages you use?
Yeah, so I mean, I listened a lot to what people took, especially from the United working group. And I've worked with several people. I feel like the box success took many companies, not just mine. It took many companies, many of the industry to be able to move $5 billion of produce. So since then, when the funding ended, I've really tried to work with many people to come together to figure out a program that could be sustainable and continued. And I think there's a lot of people that are doing that, but I've tried to figure that out, what could take the learnings like they've asked and continue to go. So I've worked with a lot of people to try to build a program in Chicago and in Illinois, and work with my local congressional, also local, the mayor's office and everything, and build it. So what I plan to do is use and I'm going to share my screen. And just, Angela, if you can nod for me to just make sure that you can see it, or Robert, because I can't see Angela. Can you see it? Okay. So I plan to use a document, and then also have another effective document that will talk about how much labor and how much the produce industry, how effective this program was. And so this program will basically take the learning of the produce box, the 10 to 12 pound box. It will have hubs that are going to be similar with a refrigerated reefer that will bring produce boxes closer to the homes. It's a parallel program that will work with many of the nutrition programs that are already out there. It's a parallel program. It'll work with this unbelievable supply chain that was created during the Farmers to Family program, with local faith-based organizations, YMCA, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the whole, any kind of domestic violence. They could take the amount of boxes that they need, 125, 1,000, whatever they need, and bring it back to their own local communities. The most important part will be there will be funding within each box to be able to support this. And it has been proven already in our own areas to be able to help with workforce development, anti-violence measure, and family and community support. So I hope to be able to speak about this when I'm there, and to talk about how we've seen change and how we think this is a scalable and a model that will take the entire community, and also about, this is for a longer conversation, but how we really think that excess produce can work to be the source for much of this program. So this is work that I will be working on before getting there, to be able to have some bigger conversations. But I just suggest that if there's a topic that you are passionate about, then maybe you can do some pre-work to have some more bigger conversations while at the conference.
Great. Hey, and Melissa, while we're on this subject, can you talk about how you engaged with these offices early on, some of these congressionals early on, to talk about your concept?
Yeah, so I worked by working with a lot of my community organizations. The one I'm working with very closely is Black Men United. Reverend John Harrell had a lot of communities, and I've been going out to the local groups, and I've been working with a lot of aldermen, and then they've introduced me to a lot of the, I've been working with really with Bobby Rush, Congressman Bobby Rush's office, and then they introduced me to more people. And that was like my first step. And from more, so it was really a grassroots approach, to be honest. And it's had a lot of success. And those were my first steps. And I also talked to your office as well. And there's just been, really, it's been a waterfall of things that have happened since then. But I really think it's what's been told to me, it's kind of like food safety. Nobody can do any of that alone. It's about working with many groups and putting people together to try to have more success. So my approach has been to work with anyone who's interested. So that's really how I've been able to work with more and more people to try to get something moving again.
Great. Okay, if we can bring back the panel. Great. So what I want to say to the group is I think was mentioned in the chat. If you have some questions, please use the chat. We're gonna open it up in just a couple minutes for that kind of discussion for folks on the phone, on the phone or on the Zoom right now. But what I wanted to ask in general was, we've talked about kind of what happens in a meeting, what are the most effective communication tools that you'd have in a meeting and making that contact. But what I wanted to talk about, what are some of the best ways to stay in contact with these with the Hill offices once you've kind of had that interaction? What have you found to be effective in kind of keeping that dialogue going after you've been to their office or had a discussion with them? And someone can start off. That matters to me. Shay?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest communication is just to follow. They're going to give you a business card when you're in there. The staffers are, an email saying, hey, I'm still here. We really don't have an answer yet. It's probably the easiest way. I wouldn't argue that it's a phenomenal approach, but it's at least there's a line of communication that you can maintain.
I would certainly recommend asking what the best way to follow up is.
I'd also say, I'm sorry, you want to go, Melissa? Okay. I know this isn't an option for everybody, but again, if you have a local operation in the district, invite, and you're open to it, of course, invite the member of Congress out to join. I mean, we always love sending her different places, or invite the district staff too, because I have my counterparts in the district who also handle ag issues. And we communicate frequently when issues come up. Like we worked extensively on the food box program. There's lots of exciting stuff happening in our state, Melissa, that sounds very similar to what you're doing. We're trying to track down USDA and figure out more of their plans. So, I mean, I think just, and then just continually following up and find those opportunities to just keep engaging. So,
are you seeing, Jen, that the congressional offices and members are more open now to do visits post kind of COVID? And is that?
Yeah, we were getting there. Now that you say that, though, I think a lot of these visits too can be outdoors. So, I mean, we still want to find, it means a lot more when you have those in-person interactions, I think. So we try to definitely find a way to make it work.
Yeah. Melissa?
I was gonna ask Jen too, I found, and I wonder with your feedback, is it okay to ask for some timelines on things, or is it not, is that a bad approach to ask for dates and timelines?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you're asking. I mean, everything just, I think it's reasonable. I mean, I guess it depends on your interaction, or just say, sometimes it's like, I don't know, maybe say something like, I really appreciated the opportunity to discuss this. This is important to me and my family or other producers in the region. When do you expect we might have some movement on the issue and would be a good time for me to follow up. I mean, that's kind of an email I would write if I was trying to, but you're also particularly like, you're a grower, producer, exporter, shipper in the region, and your voice matters. So you shouldn't feel bad too about pestering the office. And I mean, if it's important to you, these are your elected members of Congress. So, I mean, and we're the staff. So I don't know. I wouldn't feel too bad.
Jen, let me ask you one more question before we kind of move on to some questions from the group. Do you agree with some of the data saying that, the era of these types of town halls, constituent meetings in this virtual world are going to continue? Do you think that's still going to be the case based on kind of your experience over the last, 18 months or so?
To a certain degree, absolutely. I think, telework is here to stay for a lot of people. I think we've recognized that we can be just as productive, if not more productive. Also working from home and taking meetings, particularly with right now, at least what we're facing pandemic wise, you can still have that face-to-face interaction. So I would expect a certain degree. That being said, I think there will always be meetings on Capitol Hill. There will always be opportunities to fly out. And that's certainly important too. I mean, that's important for many different reasons. So I think you'll see more of this kind of technology so it's important to get comfortable with it and find compelling ways to make it engaging, which we still struggle with as an office. It's not the same to have a telephone or, a virtual event on a certain subject. It's just, so, it's just a growing pains, but I think we're going to have to figure it out and get used to it.
How are the members adjusting to it? Are they becoming more tech savvy?
Yes. They are, I think it's comes to everyone's getting there at their own pace, but I think we've certainly by now, I think everyone's has adjusted for the most part. It's so funny. I had to take a phone call a few days ago, and I was talking over people, interrupting because I'm so used to doing video now. So yeah, I think everyone's adjusting.
Okay. Well, I wanted to leave a few minutes to have folks who are on the webinar here to ask some questions of the panel. If you have some, you can use the chat function. I don't know, even raise your hand. If that works. I'm not sure, Amanda, if that works, or Angela. And we can bring them on to ask a question. Anybody?
Robert, it looks like Jack has a question. Jack, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask.
Hello, everyone. I'm with Old Time Produce based out of St. Charles, Missouri. I'm new to Old Time, but not new to the industry. So I'm looking very forward to the conference this year. Melissa, I was just following up about your produce box infographic. We actually adapted after the USDA Farmers to Family and made up our own program. And we started selling boxes to a lot of local nonprofits for $20. With that being said, we've been working with local and state legislation on our end here in Missouri to try to increase those food box programs. So anything that Old Time can do from like a storytelling perspective, as we now are a nationally woman-owned certified company, we'll be more than glad to help support that initiative, because I do know that our CEO and President Joan DeLeo wants to make sure that we're doing everything that we have on Capitol Hill to have a voice, and local and regionally as well too.
Awesome. I think Jack telling that story. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think telling that story, and Robert, I think, just making sure that we get that group together to tell that story really helps. And I mean, I know Joan's been a really great advocate of it as well. So Jack, I agree.
Yeah, Jonah's
leadership and all this, Jack, I mean, she's been a great member of the working group, and, I know a few others on the phone have as well, but appreciate those comments.
Yeah, Joan actually recruited me from the food bank side of things. So I got to actually see the implementation of the program from the food bank side, from the nonprofit side, now to the wholesaler side. So just being able to tell that story from two angles to help position to like what you guys were talking about from the emotional side, I think would be really good as all of us as a whole.
Great. Some other questions, a couple other questions? Amanda, anybody?
No other hands up.
What's that?
I said there are no other hands up at the moment.
All right, well, let me ask another question since it's my prerogative. So let me ask everybody, you've talked about the personal message is probably the best message, which 100% agree. I think, not focusing as much on the traditional ask as it is to focus on, kind of bringing these messages home to make them resonate, kind of make them really stand out in terms of the impact they're going to have during your meetings. Are there other tools, do you think, other areas that you think, could potentially be effective? And the reason I asked this, well, I have my own sense of what that is, but I wanted to hear from you guys and kind of see if there's some other areas that you think merely make an office or a meeting stand out to a congressional office. And Jen, you can weigh in on this as well, besides that personal connection. Anybody?
I think presenting a problem and working with an office to brainstorm, kind of like what Melissa was talking about. That's what my boss introduced 2 pieces of legislation last year related to the food box program to allow for more local producers in states. So diverting some federal funding to states so they can purchase excess products from local producers to kind of get around some of the federal requirements and just get the products that were rotting in the fields to try to get that out and help farmers and local food banks. And I talked to the local co-ops. I talked to, some of the farmers that were doing this and they were just indispensable. So I think, and even just, so, just presenting, coming to your congressional office and engaging and here's the problem we're facing. And how can we work on this together, and making that connection with someone and finding that partner in Congress and that staff that wants to try to fix things and make it a little better. So I that's kind of a little vague, but
does data help?
Yeah, I think data definitely helps. Numbers help, painting a story on the impacts of the district. I think that absolutely helps. And we did a lot of work too related to H2A and with our local state office who was familiar with the issue and during approach to get some language and to help. Sorry, now I'm getting into the specifics, but so, I think data helps. I think presenting problems and recognizing those individuals at the staff level that have that drive that you connect with, that want to make a difference. And not all, we're people too. So you're going to find shades of folks out there. So, but when you do find that one that wants to help, like keeping that connection up and trying to dig into a problem together. And I think it's helpful to everybody, because our job too is to work for our boss and represent them well. And if there's a problem in the district that she or he can potentially fix, like we want to know about it and dig into it and see what we can do. So that's the whole point. So
Robert, just to add to that, I think I can answer it from a different perspective. I definitely have seen a version of not being successful, and why did that happen? And I think it was lack of preparedness. So I think that's key. And then again, to Jen's point, if you're going to brainstorm or if you're really looking to collaborate in some way to make an outcome, change an outcome, then you need to be curious. You can't just go in there with all of the facts and the answers. I think so. I think there's a level of interest that goes beyond what you have to say, really trying to find out where the other party is. And that's, that doesn't just apply to our congressional visits. I think that's in general, but I think that that's always a helpful thing. You should go in there with some curiosity about why things are the way they are, or what the perceived barriers are. And it ties back into what Shay beautifully said earlier, is that we need to know what people know about what we do. And again, we take for granted what we know. I think it's one of our biggest challenges as an industry as it relates to congressional visits and marketing, quite frankly. So that's all I would add to that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, if there's 2 or 3 big takeaways from today, that even, that I've heard, is making it personal, being engaging, don't be afraid. And really, back to what Danelle, you said, and Shay said earlier, is don't assume that folks know how you guys run your businesses and operations. And, you need to really kind of set the stage. Melissa mentioned it, set the stage of where we were in March of last year, and where we had to get to where we were successful in the food box program, for instance. We got to set that stage very clearly in immigration reform come September, especially on the Senate side, and trying to understand better, have them better understand the dire straits that are out there, the real world examples. So those are areas that I think, are big takeaways for me, and I hope others on the phone or on the Zoom call as well, from today's discussion. And I want to share a quick screen with you guys, or just one more. I just want to remind folks, as I thank, Jen and Melissa and Shay and Danelle for doing this. What are you guys seeing? Are you seeing the questions and discussion? Okay, great. Just remind you guys about our next upcoming series of following today's discussion. We have a final chance review, and then that's where we'll really dig deep into the issues and what our important key message points will be during the Washington conference the following week. We'll really spend some time there talking about last minute, kind of what the schedules are going to look like and things like that. And then obviously, as I mentioned, Monday, we're bringing back the first day of the conference, our advocacy boot camp in the afternoon. So we're excited about bringing that back. And again, that's 2 to 3 hours of really, on the ground training of what to expect, what's the best approaches, kind of building on what we've even done today on kind of effective messaging, and really seeing kind of on the ground what's going to be effective in our meetings the following 2 days. So again, I want to thank the panel. I want to thank all of you for being with us today. I hope you will join us in September, not just obviously for our next webinar, but also for the Washington conference. If you haven't signed up already, it's very easy. It's available on our website to sign up. So with that, again, thank you guys all, and have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.